The great assembly hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystalline floor, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into artificial stars that mimicked the birth of galaxies. At the front, ornate thrones of liquid, mercury and crystallized light housed the elder races, the Zelfarians, with their silver skin gleaming like armor, the Nexari floating in their energy cocoons, and the ancient Formic, whose mechanical bodies hummed with millennia of accumulated knowledge. Ambassador Sarah Chun adjusted her simple fabric uniform as she settled into the back row, wooden chair creaking slightly under her weight. Around her sat the other junior species, the fur-covered Kythons, who still used primitive projectile weapons, the insectoid Vril, who communicated through chemical secretions, and the amphibious Gorlok, whose webbed fingers constantly dripped moisture onto the floor. Session 847 of the Galactic Council will commence, announced Prime Minister Zexthil, his voice resonating through bioacoustic enhancers that made the hall tremble. His 4 eyes swept across the assembly, lingering with obvious disdain on the back rows. Today we discuss the mining rights to the Kepler Nebula. Sarah pulled out an old-fashioned notebook, not the holographic displays favored by the advanced races, but actual paper. Her pen moved across the pages as she observed. She noted how Chancellor Vorweeks of the Nexari kept glancing nervously at his energy readings, how the Vormic delegation's leader seemed to be running diagnostic scans on everyone present, and how Prime Minister Zexthil's confident posture masked the slight tremor in his secondary arms. The debate raged for hours about territorial boundaries and resource extraction quotas. The elder races spoke in grandiose terms about their civilizational needs and technological superiority. The middle-tier species, those who'd earned better seating through military conquest or technological advancement, argued about fair distribution based on fleet strength and economic contribution. Throughout it all, the back row species remained silent, as was expected of them. They were here to observe, to learn from their betters, to gradually earn their way forward through centuries of subservience and cultural improvement. But Sarah was doing something else entirely. Her trained eyes, honed by decades of diplomatic service and military intelligence background, were mapping the real power structure of the room. She watched micro-expressions, noted who deferred to whom despite official rankings, tracked the subtle signals in coded language that revealed the true alliances and rivalries. When the session finally ended, Prime Minister Zexthil rose from his throne. Instead of the usual dismissal, he turned his attention to the back rows, his 4 eyes fixed on Sarah with undisguised curiosity and barely concealed contempt. Before we adjourn, his voice carried a mocking tone that made several elder race representatives chuckle. I find myself compelled to ask a question that has puzzled the advanced civilizations for some time now. The hall fell silent. Even the constant hum of environmental systems seemed to fade away. Ambassador Chun, Zexthil continued, and indeed all human representatives throughout our galaxy. You've been members of this council for 57 standard years. In that time, we've observed a peculiar behavior pattern. In every setting council sessions, diplomatic dinners, transport shuttles, cultural exchanges, humans invariably choose the back seats. Even when invited forward, you politely decline and return to the rear. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. This was highly irregular. Elder races didn't typically engage directly with back row species during formal sessions. Are you finally acknowledging your species' proper place in the galactic hierarchy? Zexthil's question dripped with condescension. Do you humans instinctively recognize your inferiority to the races that achieved interstellar civilization while your kind was still discovering fire? Sarah felt every eye in the massive hall turn toward her. Her fellow humans sat perfectly still, but she could sense their tension not from fear, but from anticipation. They'd been waiting for this moment, knowing it would come eventually. She stood slowly, her movement controlled and deliberate. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the vast space without any technological enhancement. "Prime Minister Zexthil, you honor us with your curiosity," she began, her tone respectful, but somehow carrying an undercurrent that made several beings shift uncomfortably in their seats. "The answer to your question is quite simple, and I'm happy to share it with a distinguished assembly." Sarah's eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of beings who had considered themselves her superiors for over half a century. "We sit in the back because we learned long ago that you see everything better from there." Asterisk, the silence that followed Sarah's words stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. In the middle rows, several species representatives leaned forward, their various sensory organs focused intently on the human ambassador. The elder races, however, remained still, though Sarah's enhanced peripheral vision caught the subtle stiffening of postures that indicated her words had struck deeper than expected. "Elaborate," Prime Minister Zexthil commanded, his four eyes narrowing. The bioacoustic enhancers amplified not just his words, but the dangerous undertone that made lesser species cower. Sarah remained standing, her notebook still open in her hands. "Of course, Prime Minister. You see, humans have a saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But we've learned something even more valuable. Keep yourself where you can watch everyone else." She gestured toward the ornate front section. "From your prestigious thrones, you can see the stage, the speakers, the official proceedings. Very impressive, very dignified." Her tone remained respectful, but something in her delivery made the Vormik leader's mechanical head tilt in a gesture of calculation. "But from back here," Sarah continued, "we see everything that really matters. We see who whispers to whom during debates. We notice when Chancellor Voyowic's S-energy readings spike during discussions about military spending, curious for a supposedly peaceful species. We observe how Councillor Thexmore's mechanical joints lock up whenever someone mentions the Outer Rim territories. Interesting for someone who claims no interest in expansion." The named beings shifted visibly, their composure cracking just slightly. Other representatives throughout the hall began looking around with new awareness, suddenly conscious of their own unconscious behaviors. Dr. James Martinez, Sarah's chief science advisor, rose to stand beside her. His voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades analyzing alien psychology. "Prime Minister, human military doctrine learned something crucial during our species' development. The most dangerous position in any room is often the most obvious one. Front row seats make excellent targets." Admiral Liu Wei, the human military attaché, joined them. His battle-scarred face bore the marks of conflicts fought before humans ever reached the stars. "We've survived as a species by being adaptable, observant, and underestimated. Your question suggests you've never wondered why we declined every invitation to upgrade our seating over 5 decades. The Zeltharian Prime Minister's silver skin began to shift color, a physiological response Sarah had catalogued as indicating either rage or fear. "You presume to judge your betters? To spy on the elder races?" "Not judge," Sarah replied calmly. "Learn, adapt, survive." She flipped through pages of her notebook. "For instance, we've learned that the Nexari Chancellor's energy cocoon fluctuates in a specific pattern exactly 72 hours before your species initiates territorial expansion. We've observed that Vormik diagnostic scans increase in frequency when they're evaluating military threats. We've noted that Zeltharian skin coloration follows predictable patterns that correlate with aggressive decision-making." The hall erupted. Representatives from dozens of species began talking simultaneously, some in outrage, others in what sounded like grudging respect, and a few in barely concealed panic. But Sarah wasn't finished. "We've also learned which species consistently vote together despite public disagreements. which alliances are genuine versus those maintained for appearances, and which civilizations are far more vulnerable than they project. She closed her notebook with a soft snap that somehow carried clearly across the chaos. We sit in the back because that's where survivors sit, Prime Minister. And in a galaxy where civilizations rise and fall with alarming regularity, survival matters more than ceremony. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the team's xenobiologist, stepped forward. Her expertise in alien behavioral patterns had made her invaluable during first contact scenarios. Every species in this room has evolved different survival strategies. The Nexari developed energy manipulation. The Vormik perfected mechanical enhancement. Your people achieved biological optimization. Humans developed something else, the ability to read situations, adapt quickly, and find advantages and apparent disadvantages. What you call sitting in the back, Admiral Liu added, we call maintaining tactical awareness. What you interpret. As acceptance of inferiority, we consider strategic positioning. The implications of the humans' revelation began to sink in. For 57 years, while the elder races had basked in their sense of superiority, the humans had been conducting a comprehensive intelligence operation from plain sight. They'd transformed their assigned low status into an intelligence-gathering advantage that no advanced surveillance technology could match. Captain Rosa Santos, head of human security, revealed the final piece. Prime Minister, you asked if we acknowledge our inferiority. The truth is, we've never considered ourselves inferior, just underestimated. And in our experience, being underestimated is the greatest tactical advantage in the universe. The great assembly hall had become completely silent again. But this was a different silence, heavy with realization rather than anticipation. The elder races were beginning to understand that for over half a century they'd been observed, analyzed, and cataloged by beings they dismissed as primitive. But Sarah wasn't done. She had one more revelation that would change everything. Prime Minister Zexthel, you asked your question at a particularly interesting time, because after 57 years of observation, we've identified something that should concern every being in this hall. The atmospheric processors throughout the Great Assembly Hall seemed to hold their breath as Sarah Chun prepared to deliver what would become the most significant intelligence briefing in Galactic Council history. The tension was so thick that even species without traditional emotional responses were showing signs of stress. The Vormek's mechanical joints whirred more rapidly. The Nexari's energy fields flickered, and the Zeltharian Prime Minister's skin had deepened to a shade that human observers had learned meant extreme agitation. 3 months ago, Sarah began, our deep space monitoring stations detected gravitational anomalies in the void sector. Anomalies that match historical patterns. From the great archive patterns that predate every civilization currently represented in this hall. Dr. Martinez activated a holographic display that materialized above the back rows, a simple human device that suddenly commanded the attention of the galaxy's most advanced species. The display showed star charts with massive dark regions spreading, like cancer, across entire sectors. The Void Swarm has returned, Sarah announced. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Several Elder Race representatives rose to their feet in alarm. The Vormik delegation began rapid-fire calculations, their mechanical bodies clicking and whirring. The Nexari Chancellor's energy cocoon flared so bright it temporarily blinded nearby species. But it was Prime Minister Zexthul's reaction that told the real story. His 4 eyes widened in terror, his silver skin turned almost white, and his voice, when he finally found it, carried none of its previous arrogance. Impossible, he whispered. The Void Swarm was destroyed 14,000 years ago. The Elder races united to drive them into hibernation in the dark regions between galaxies, Admiral Liu interrupted. Not to destroy them. Your own records, which we've studied extensively during our years of subservient observation, are quite clear about this distinction. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward with additional data. Our analysis suggests the swarm has been dormant, not dead. Recent gravitational disturbances, caused by increased mining operations in the Kepler Nebula, the very mining rights you've been debating today, have generated resonance patterns that match swarm awakening signatures. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The elder races' own expansion and resource extraction had triggered the return of their most ancient enemy. Captain Santos revealed the tactical assessment. Based on our historical analysis and current observations, the void swarm will reach the outer territories within 6 standard months. They'll consume everything in their path: energy, matter, life itself. Unlike previous galactic threats, they can't be negotiated with, bribed, or reasoned with. They exist solely to devour. The hall erupted into chaos again, but this time it was panic rather than indignation. Representatives from dozens of species began shouting questions, demands, and accusations. The carefully maintained hierarchy of the Galactic Council was collapsing in real time as the reality of existential threat overrode centuries of diplomatic protocol. Sarah waited for the initial wave of panic to subside before continuing. The historical records indicate that when the elder races last faced the void swarm, they had one critical advantage: unity. Every advanced civilization worked together, pooling resources and strategies. She paused meaningfully. They also had something else. What? Prime Minister Zextil's voice was barely audible. They had species like humans in their alliance. Beings considered primitive or inferior, who brought unconventional thinking and desperate innovation to the fight. According to the archives, it was often the lesser species who developed the most effective counter-strategies. Dr. Martinez displayed additional data. The swarm operates on predictable patterns based on consumption efficiency and energy optimization. Advanced civilizations, with their standardized technologies and logical strategic thinking, are relatively easy for them to counter. But chaos, unpredictability, and what you might call primitive tactics have historically proven more effective. The implications were staggering. The very traits that had led the elder races to dismiss humanity and other junior species, their unpredictability, their reliance on intuition over pure logic, their tendency toward what advanced civilizations considered inefficient solutions, might be exactly what was needed to survive. Admiral Yu delivered the next blow. Prime Minister, we've also analyzed the current military capabilities of the elder races. Your fleets are magnificent for territorial disputes and showing force against inferior opponents. But they're designed around the assumption of fighting other advanced civilizations with similar technologies and strategies. The Void Swarm doesn't follow those rules, Captain Santos added. They adapt to overcome any systematic approach. Historical records show that conventional military tactics failed catastrophically during their last appearance. What worked were guerrilla strategies, asymmetric warfare, and what your military analysts would consider desperate measures. Sarah closed this section with the most disturbing revelation of all. The truth is, Prime Minister, while you've been maintaining your positions at the front of this hall, focusing on ceremony and hierarchy, we've been preparing for this day. Not because we knew it was coming, but because humans never stopped preparing for existential threats. She gestured to her small team. Every human in this room has military training, survival experience, and expertise in unconventional problem-solving. We've spent 57 years studying not just your civilizations, but your weaknesses, your blind spots, and your inability to adapt quickly to paradigm shifts. The great assembly hall had become completely silent except for the sound of environmental systems and the occasional mechanical whir from nervous Vormic representatives. So when you asked why humans always sit in the back, Sarah concluded, You are really asking why we've positioned ourselves to survive what's coming. And now that it's here, you're going to need to decide whether your pride is more important than your continued existence. In the 48 hours following Sarah's revelation, the Great Assembly Hall had transformed from a place of ceremonial dignity into something resembling a war room, the one that looked like it had been designed by committee. Holographic. Displays from dozens of different technologies created a chaotic light show above the assembly floor. Translation devices struggled to keep pace with rapid-fire discussions in hundreds of languages and communication methods. The careful seating arrangement that had defined galactic hierarchy for millennia had been abandoned as species clustered around whoever had relevant expertise. Sarah stood at what had once been the ceremonial center of the hall, now serving as the de facto command center. Around her, an unlikely alliance was taking shape, but not without considerable friction. The Zeltharian battle fleet could establish a defensive perimeter at the Kepler Junction. Admiral Liu was explaining to a group that would have been unthinkable just days before. Prime Minister Zexthul, his silver skin still pale with stress, listened intently as the human military advisor outlined strategies that his own war council had declared impossible. Impossible, declared War Commander Hextar, his forearms gesturing dismissively. Zeltharian vessels require 72 hours for full tactical deployment. Our logistics systems are optimized for systematic advance, not rapid repositioning. Captain Santos, who had been studying Zeltharian military doctrine from the back rows for decades, stepped forward. War Commander, with respect, your logistics are optimized for fighting other advanced civilizations who follow similar deployment patterns. The Void Swarm doesn't give you 72 hours. Our analysis suggests you have 12 hours maximum before they overwhelm any fixed position. The debate that followed was heated and multilingual. Dr. Vasquez found herself mediating between the Nexari energy specialists and the Vormic tactical analysts, both of whom were struggling to adapt their sophisticated technologies to what humans bluntly called hit-and-run tactics. Asterisk. Chancellor Voorweeks, she explained patiently, your energy manipulation capabilities are incredible for sustained operations, but the swarm consumes energy directly. Using your primary weapons against them is like feeding them. We need you to think about energy as a defensive tool disruption rather than destruction. The Chancellor's energy cocoon flickered with frustration. This contradicts fundamental Nexari military philosophy. Energy is meant to overwhelm opponents through superior force projection, which is exactly why it won't work, Admiral Liu replied bluntly. Superior force projection assumes your opponent follows recognizable strategic logic. The Void Swarm doesn't. They're more like a natural disaster than an enemy army. Dr. Martinez was having similar challenges with the Vormic delegation. Their mechanical precision, honed over millennia, was struggling to adapt to strategies that relied on unpredictability and improvisation. Counselor Vexmore, he explained, we need your manufacturing capabilities, but not for standard military hardware. We need you to build things that don't make sense, weapons that seem inefficient, defensive systems that appear to have obvious flaws, ships that look cobbled together from spare parts. The Vormic leader's optical sensors dimmed in what humans had learned indicated deep confusion. This violates all principles of optimal engineering. Why would we deliberately create inferior technology? Because, Sarah interjected, the swarm has encountered optimal technology for 14,000 years. They've adapted to overcome every systematic approach. What they haven't prepared for is dealing with technology that seems broken but isn't. Strategies that appear desperate but are actually calculated, and tactics that look like chaos but follow a different kind of logic. The real breakthrough came when the back row species began demonstrating what they meant. The fur-covered Chthons, dismissed for millennia as primitive because they still used projectile weapons, showed how their inefficient firearms could be rapidly modified to fire unconventional ammunition that disrupted swarm feeding patterns. The insectoid vril, whose chemical communication had been considered crude compared to advanced telepathic or technological systems, demonstrated how their secretions could be weaponized to create chemical barriers that confused swarm navigation. The amphibious gorlak, whose constant moisture had been seen as unsanitary by advanced species, revealed that their biological adaptations could survive in environmental conditions that would shut down sophisticated life support systems. "This is what you've been missing," Sarah explained to the assembled elder races. "You've been so focused on advancement and efficiency that you've forgotten the value of adaptability and redundancy. Every primitive trait you've dismissed is actually a survival mechanism." But the real test came when they tried to coordinate actual defensive operations. The Zeltharian battle fleet, accustomed to precise formations and coordinated attacks, struggled to work alongside human vessels that changed tactics mid-battle. The Nexari energy specialists found their sophisticated targeting systems confused by vril chemical clouds the Vormek's optimal positioning algorithms couldn't account for. Gorlak ships that deliberately chose suboptimal positions to create unexpected attack angles. "This is chaos," War Commander Hexstar declared after a particularly frustrating simulation. "How can we coordinate defensive operations when our allies refuse to follow established military protocols?" "That's exactly the point," Captain Santos replied. "The swarm expects established military protocols. They've adapted to counter every systematic approach. Our only advantage is that they can't predict what we're going to do. Because we're combining strategies from civilizations they've never encountered working together." Admiral Liu pulled up tactical displays showing historical swarm encounters. "Look at the pattern, War Commander. Every time the elder races fought them with conventional strategies, they lost. The only victories came from combined operations that included what you call primitive species using unconventional methods." Dr. Vasquez added the biological perspective. "The swarm is like a virus that's adapted to overcome all known immune responses. But when you introduce genetic material from organisms they've never encountered, their adaptation mechanisms can't keep up. That's what we're doing, strategically introducing tactical genetic material they can't predict or counter." The turning point came when Prime Minister Zexthil, putting aside millennia of cultural conditioning, asked the question that would define the alliance. "Ambassador Chun, what do you need us to do?" It was the first time in recorded Galactic Council history that an elder race leader had asked a back-row species for direction. Sarah's response would reshape galactic civilization forever. "Prime Minister, we need you to stop being advanced and start being desperate. Because desperate civilizations survive. Advanced ones become extinct." Asterisk 6 standard months later, the edge of the Kepler Nebula had become the most chaotic battlefield in galactic history. What should have been a coordinated military engagement resembled more like an interstellar bar fight orchestrated by a committee of tactical madmen. And somehow, impossibly, it was working. Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the last resort, a ship that perfectly embodied the new alliance's philosophy. Built from Vormic precision engineering, powered by Nexarari energy cores, armed with Zeltharian weapon systems, and crewed by every species that had once sat in the back rows of the Galactic Council, it looked like it had been assembled by someone with a severe design disorder. That was exactly the point. "Contact in 30 seconds, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres, a human tactical officer who was coordinating with a Qaeda weapons specialist whose fur was standing on end with battle excitement. "Swarm formation matches, pattern 7 massive. Energy signature, approximately 12,000 units. Pattern 7, Sarah mused, consulting not a sophisticated tactical computer, but the same notebook she'd used in the council chamber. "Dr. Martinez, What's our response? According to the plan, we shouldn't have one, he replied from his position next to a Vril Communications specialist whose chemical secretions were creating a colorful cloud around the bridge. Pattern 7 assumes we'll deploy the Zeltharian. Defensive formation with necessary energy support. The swarm has adapted to counter that combination perfectly. So instead, we're going to do something so tactically stupid that it shouldn't work. Admiral Liu announced, his scarred face wearing the kind of smile that had made him famous for impossible victories. War Commander Hexstar, are your people ready to commit what your tactical manuals call strategic suicide? The Zeltharian officer's forearms moved in gestures that would have been considered profanity in more civilized circumstances. Over the months of preparation, he'd learned that human military expressions often preceded their most effective strategies. The Zeltharian battle fleet is prepared to engage in creative tactical interpretation. Through the viewports, space itself seemed to writhe as the void swarm approached. They weren't ships in any recognizable sense, more like living dark matter that consumed everything in its path, growing stronger with each victory. Historical records showed them adapting in real time to overcome any systematic military response. Chancellor, for Wix, how are your people handling the energy suppression? Sarah asked. The Nexari leader's energy cocoon flickered with what humans had learned indicated grim determination. Ambassador, asking my people to suppress rather than project energy violates every instinct we've developed over millennia. But we are learning to think like prey rather than predators. Counselor Thexmore? The Vormek's mechanical voice carried undertones of what could only be described as mechanical anxiety. All systems are operating at deliberately suboptimal efficiency. Our manufacturing vessels are producing random variations in ammunition and defensive measures. It is deeply disturbing to our core programming, but we are complying. Captain Santos, coordinating with ground-based operations throughout. The system reported in. Surface installations are ready. Every primitive species has contributed defensive measures that our computer models say shouldn't work. The Gorlek have flooded key positions with their biological secretions. The Vril have established chemical barrier networks, and the Kythons have set up projectile weapons that fire ammunition designed by committee. The swarm struck with the coordinated precision of a natural force. Their first wave should have encountered the standard elder race response, systematic defensive formations designed to maximize firepower, efficiency, and minimize casualties. Instead, they met controlled chaos, Zeltharian battlecruisers following precise tactical protocols, suddenly broke formation without warning and began what could only be described as an improvised dance around swarm units. Nexari energy specialists, instead of projecting devastating attacks, created random energy fluctuations that disrupted swarm adaptation mechanisms. Vormik precision manufacturing ships began launching ammunition that changed specifications mid-flight.